Good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started in about a minute. We've been working really hard to get everybody in here.
Hello, everyone.
Angela. Well, it is 3 o'clock, so we will go ahead and start. We don't have quorum yet, so that means we can't vote on anything. But I appreciate those of you who are here now, and I know they're working hard to admit people as they come in. So pretty soon we will have quorum and we can get to the voting items. As always, we want to start our Homeless Services Advisory Committee meeting by reading our goals. And our goals are to finish the job of ending chronic homelessness, prevent and end veterans homelessness, prevent and end homelessness for families, youth, and children, and set a path to ending all types of homelessness. I will remind you to please keep yourself on mute unless you're speaking. And my preference is to recognize people who want to ask questions who have raised their virtual hand first. That doesn't mean that I will ignore you if you don't raise your virtual hand, but those who've raised their virtual hand will get recognized first. So please try to keep that in mind. It helps me to notice, to be able to catch those of you who want to ask questions as well, so I don't miss anyone that way. We do have someone for our public comment. Julia, are you ready to speak?
I am, yeah, thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thanks so much. My audio can be variable at home, so if folks can wave their hands at me if I'm not coming across clearly. So I wanted to take a moment to just talk about something I learned about recently in a local newspaper, and it was coming before our city council for a vote. And I felt uninformed as a citizen because I hadn't been aware about it. Does anybody on the call know what I'm talking about? Maybe wave your hands around if any of you do. My comment is about SCAD, and it's something that our city council was prepared to vote on. And according to the newspaper article, I have not verified this by communicating with city council directly about this. But apparently it looked like it was going to pass. However, the article, and I'm happy to share information about that if people are interested, caused such an uproar that City Council has now pushed off a vote or conversation about SCAD, hearings about SCAD, until May, as I understand it. In addition, a local entity that was a nonprofit participating in the SCAD process has officially withdrawn from that, although they will still be on it because when it was submitted for review, their name was on it and it won't be removed, but they've officially said they want to distance themselves. So briefly, why am I concerned? Well, I'm concerned, and why am I bringing it to HSAC? Well, I'm concerned because nominally, and perhaps in truth, the focus is on increasing housing affordability. However, according to what I've read about it, the affordability clauses that will be built in are short. The time frame is thought to be 5 years, and then affordability clauses would sunset. Excuse me if I'm not using the appropriate language. I'm not a developer, and I don't work in specifically building housing or asking for funding for affordable housing. But my feeling as a person who advocates for individuals needing housing is that 5 years is a tiny amount of time. 30 years is what's normally been done here in Durham. And I'm concerned. I want to have a conversation with the members of HSAC and ask you to potentially have internal conversations about what you think should be done regarding this. I'm surprised that we as a group working in homelessness haven't been talking about this. I think it's really important for our clients. I worry that this will open the door to tear downs of affordable housing that we currently have, and building of units that are not affordable. I'd also like to ask our community to have a serious conversation about what we know about current affordable housing that may have been built using tax dollars for affordability that are going to be sunsetting soon, and who the owners are of those units. I would suggest that we have a crisis coming because I believe that units that will be sunsetting soon, next year, the year after, have been purchased by out-of-town developers, and that individuals currently residing there will no longer be residing there once the affordability clause sunsets. I think those are my concerns and my comments. And thank you, HSAC, for the work you do. Your sister organization, the City County Planning Group, has said that they have significant concerns about SCAD. And I'm wondering if HSAC could have conversations as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. We appreciate you bringing that information to us, and I agree it's something we need to have conversations about. The next item on our agenda, is Performance Management Quarterly Report. Is Jonathan here? Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I sure am. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jonathan Crooms with Durham County Veterans Services and the current chair of the Performance Management Subcommittee. And glad to be with you all this afternoon, as I am with each meeting, and going to give you a little bit of an update about what we have been up to. But before I do that, I do want to continually extend an invitation to any board members who are still looking for a subcommittee home. Performance Management Subcommittee is a great place to be. Basically, what our mission is to monitor how well our projects in our overall continuum of care, homeless services, are doing in terms of getting our homeless residents housed and supported. So that's our mission. So how have we been carrying that out the past couple months? Well, we've been quite busy with a couple of projects. The first thing that we have been working on is on a way to evaluate all of our projects in the continuum care outside of the funding processes. So you may be familiar with the fact that a couple times a year we have a COC and an ESG funding process. But not every project in the COC participates in that, and some projects may get their funding elsewhere. And we have been having a conversation for quite some time about how we can more broadly evaluate everybody, regardless of whether or not you participate in a funding competition, and separate from that. And what has come about is that Melissa Hernandez, staff member in community development, has taken the lead to create a smart sheet where all projects in our continuum of care have been invited to submit data. This was passed by our committee back in late fall, and the data that is collected is data that we use to measure up against the project benchmarks. So for those folks who were on the committee last year, you may remember that we do have a set of performance benchmarks for every type of project: permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, street outreach, emergency shelter for singles, emergency shelter for families, transitional housing, and we updated those benchmarks. And so what we are doing now is twice a year, we are collecting data from our projects so that we can see how everybody is doing. And thanks to Melissa's great work on this, the first data collection has begun in January. We're still in the middle of that and hope to be able to share some of the results with you all soon. But that information will also be publicly available through the COC website here at some point. So that's a really exciting thing that we have going on there. And again, thanks again to Melissa for her hard work on that. Another conversation that we have been having has to do with the quality of the data we're collecting. So I don't know that anybody would disagree with this, but we are very much in a data-driven world. And particularly our funding processes require more and more data. And so we have been having a conversation about, how best to improve the quality of our data, particularly around percentage error rates within our HMIS system. And we've actually had a presentation from Andrea Carey, who is with the North Carolina Coalition to End Homelessness, who has given us some suggestions for ways to update our data quality plan. I don't want to say too much about the content about that because this topic is also under the also covered by the Policy and Planning Committee, and they have to look at it too. But really what I want to emphasize there is that we're having the conversation which directly affects performance. How can we get the best data possible? And that's going to allow us to recognize great performance from our projects. It's going to allow us to get a better idea about what our strengths and weaknesses are. But more importantly, we owe it to our clients to collect the best data possible so that when we're making the decisions that affect their lives, we're doing it with the best data possible. Third thing that we have been working on, and I think many of you present today have been part of this, is the Housing First Cross COC evaluation. So this is not necessarily just the prerogative of the Performance Management Committee, but I bring it up because many of our members are participating in it. But our COC, along with the Wake and Orange County COCs, has a partner to do a cross evaluation, give other COCs an opportunity to look and see how we're doing. And likewise, we go out and visit their projects and evaluate how well that they are saying that they're doing housing first. Housing first has been a topic that has come up time and again that we are always grappling with. So that has been at work the past couple months. Just yesterday, the group had its sort of debriefing, and folks had a chance to give some feedback about how well things went, other things that maybe could have gone better. So that's been at work with many of our committee members. And then the last thing I do want to mention is that we have completed the COC spring competition scoring, and we're once we have all of that finalized, we'll have a little bit more for you there. So that's a little bit about what we've been up to. And again, want to extend this invitation. If you are still looking for a subcommittee home, consider us. And these are conversations I think that anybody on our board can participate in. And if you ever have any questions, I'm of course happy to answer them.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you for your explanation of the different things that you're doing. We appreciate that. Does anyone have any questions for Jonathan? Okay. The next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes. So you should have gotten your minutes and email yesterday, and take just a second to thank Melissa for doing such a great job on getting that out. If y'all have looked at her email and all the information that she has in that, it's very helpful. We appreciate that. So if you had a chance to look at the minutes, we need to approve those for the February minutes today. And so I will accept a motion to approve those minutes when you're ready.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Angela. Need a second?
I'll second. This is Eliza Matthew.
Thank you, Eliza. You'll vote in the chat, yes if you approve, no if you do not approve, or abstain if you need to abstain. I don't see any no's. It looks like the minutes are approved. Thank you for that. The next item on the agenda is the introduction of a new member. Humphrey Truitt has been appointed to the city nonprofit seat on the HSAC. This is just for information because this is an appointed seat. So this is not a seat that the HSAC has to vote on. But Humphrey Truitt, welcome to the HSAC. Thank you. Oh, okay. Good. Oh, there you are, right there at the top. Okay, on my screen anyway. Good to meet you. Thank you.
You too. Thanks.
Okay. The next thing I want to information only that I need to give you is that Reverend Renee Vaughn has been appointed to the Performance Management Subcommittee. So thank you for accepting that and for joining that committee, because I know performance management is always looking for a few good members, as Jonathan just said. And we do have one person, a new person that's been appointed that we do need to vote on. Damian Talley is the Executive Director of Durham Crisis Response Center, and he will be taking the Victim Services seat. So that seat does need to be approved by the HSAC. So I would like at this time to take a motion to approve Damian Talley to the Victim Services seat.
I'll make a motion. This is Eliza Matthew to approve Damian Talley to fill that seat.
Thank you, Eliza. I need a second.
This is Jonathan Crooms, and I second that motion.
Thank you, Jonathan. Anyone? Now we'll vote in the chat. Yes, if you agree. HSAC members, no if you do not, and abstain if you need to abstain. Okay. Looks like that one has passed as well. So welcome Damian to the HSAC. Is Damian here? Okay. Apparently he wasn't able to make it to today's meeting, but we'll make sure he knows that he's been approved, and hopefully we'll meet him at the next meeting. If you're monitoring the chat, please notice that the form to sign in has been posted a couple of times. So please be sure that you sign in for today's meeting so you have credit for being here. Next item on our agenda is COC trainings and future monitoring and updates to policies and procedures. And for this, I have Lloyd Schmeidler to talk about that.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair. Lloyd Schmeidler, Senior Community Development Analyst in the Community Development Department. On this and subsequent item, I'm subbing for our homelessness team manager, Colin Davis, who was called to another meeting. I think in recent meetings, Colin has mentioned that the City of Durham's implementation of the ESG CV funds of over $4 million that were received from HUD in 2020 and 2021 during the height of the coronavirus pandemic, that the city's distribution and use of those funds was monitored by HUD in September of 2022. As a result of that monitoring, the city was notified by HUD later last year that we had 7 findings, which are a concern for HUD and for the city and the Community Development Department. One of those findings specifically concerns having adequate policies and procedures in place that regulate and govern the use of ESG CV funds in our jurisdiction. And as a result of that, we are in the process of updating wide variety.
You're muted, Lloyd.
Well, so you haven't heard anything that I've said. I thought I cleared that.
We did just up until you said wide variety, then you went mute.
Okay, sorry about that. I don't know exactly how that happened. I'll leave my mouse alone. But so we have to update a wide variety of policies and procedures, and the proposal that is before the HSAC is we want to seek the approval of the HSAC to allow the body to approve policies and procedures that are reviewed. My understanding is, I think they're going to be reviewed by the policy and planning subcommittee before they are submitted to the HSAC for its final approval. We need to get these policies and procedures updated by the end of September, I believe, and we have probably 10 or 12, I'm not sure exactly how many documents, policies and procedures we're going to need to update. But so we're asking for someone to make a proposal to allow the HSAC to approve updated policies and procedures by email votes rather than waiting for scheduled HSAC meetings to make sure that we can meet HUD's requirements for responding to the findings. HUD wants us to address all of the findings, including monitoring the subrecipients of ESG CV funds by the end of September, and we're working feverishly on our team to meet those deadlines. I'm happy to entertain any questions about this before the committee takes action on it.
Does anyone have any questions for Lloyd about this? Ricky.
Thank you, Helen. Lloyd, is this just like updating forms, or is it like making sure there's like a policy for, how CV funds were to be used? Like, is it just specific to that one grant source?
It is more general than just ESG CV, ESG coronavirus funds. It also concerns policies and procedures for ESG funds, as well as our written standards. We need to break out written standards specifically for ESG CV that are distinct from a regular ESG. It concerns more than just forms, although updating our forms was also a finding, and we need to make sure that all of our subrecipients that are using ESG and or ESG CV and or Community Development Block Grant or CDBG funds have forms that are being used with the clients receiving services that meet all of the federal requirements.
Lloyd, if you said this, I apologize, but is there a deadline for getting all of these changes made?
We've had conversations with HUD. We, I think, are under a deadline of getting all of the work done by September 30th. I think a lot of, we are aware that the HSAC typically goes on summer break during the month of July. I think we're going to be working to get as many of the policies and procedures completed and approved by the HSAC before the end of June, before that summer break starts. I believe that's our timeline. And if Melissa or other members of the homeless team that are on the call have other information, please feel free to chime in.
I think one of the big things is just that if HSAC votes to approve the email vote process, you'll expect to start seeing some of those forms and policies and procedures come through in early and mid-April. So even though we've set an internal deadline of June 30th to finish all of these, the expectation is that you'll start receiving these and the approvals will start going through in April.
Thank you, Melissa. For those who may not know, Melissa Hernandez is our team coordinator. She's doing a lot of the legwork and keeping us organized as a team to get all of this work done, and we're grateful for that work.
I'll also add that, hi all, this is Evie Holmes. I'll also add that the ESGCV program in particular will close September 30th. And so that's why the urgency to get all this done beforehand is important.
Thank you. And that was the reason when we talked about this in executive committee that we wanted to bring this to you to approve an email vote for much of this, because there's going to be a lot of moving pieces, little pieces here and there, some bigger pieces that policy and planning will go through and approve. But rather than having to bring all of that back at the April meeting or the May meeting, it's just going to, we felt it would be more effective, just bring it to be able to give it to you in an email and let you do an email vote. Any more questions? If there, go ahead, Tracy.
I'm sorry if you may have answered this already, Lloyd, but by the HSAC voting via email, that's what we're voting on today. As we receive that information and documentation from HUD, we're approving the process for you to move forward to in response to the concerns that were cited by HUD?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, and my understanding, I'm not the parliamentarian for this committee, but I would understand that a majority of the HSAC membership does need to participate in a vote, and for each email vote, and then a majority plus one of that group that is voting needs to approve each policy. So
Russ.
we're clear.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Russ.
I know that corralling the whole committee can be a challenge at times online. And a number of us that work with other boards in moments like this, we can empower an executive committee to take action and then get it kind of finalized at a follow-up meeting. Is there any provision for that so that you're corralling 4 or 5, 6 people versus 20 plus? Or would there, and that may not even be allowed, but I'm just curious if that would make things easier to keep things moving for you. It's fairly perfunctory stuff.
I know that policy and planning will be doing a lot of the reviews and they'll be doing their votes, but I'm not sure about whether we can do what you were talking about, Russ.
Looking up the governance charter for the COC.
Thank you.
I can access that.
With policy and planning doing a lot of the work on it before it comes to a vote, it shouldn't be too challenging to actually do the vote, but I hear what you're saying about trying to corral all of the people.
It's part of the governance charter that the HSAC establishes our program standards per recommendation from the Policy and Planning Committee. So that's why it does need to go to vote to HSAC.
Sorry, Ruby, could you repeat that?
So it's part of our governance charter that the program standards, the HSAC is to establish the program standards per the recommendation from Policy and Planning Committee. So that is why the vote needs to come from HSAC.
Okay, that makes sense. So policy and planning can make their changes and recommendations, but the HSAC as a whole has to approve that.
Correct.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Any other questions? Okay, in that case, I will take a motion to allow for an email vote on policies, procedures, and forms to meet the HUD recommendations that need to be corrected.
Hi, this is Ebony. I make a motion to allow email voting.
Thank you, Ebony. Do we have a second?
A second.
Thank you, Shaisha. And vote in the chat, yes if you approve, no if you do not approve, abstain if you need to abstain. Looks like the yeses have it. The vote is passed. Thank you all. I love the collaboration and work that we do here and how we work so well together. Well, that was the last item on the agenda that requires a vote. The next thing on our agenda is a system performance update. And for that, we have Lloyd once again.
All right, I'm going to try to share my screen. Sharing my screen. Finding the correct document. Here we go. Hopefully you can see that. Would you confirm that you can see that? Can you
I see it.
Very good. All right. So now I'm going to see if I can get it to start from the beginning. This has become an annual tradition in terms of the COC lead agency reporting to the HSAC, the governing board for the COC, on how we performed as a homeless system in addressing the needs of people experiencing homelessness in Durham that access our system, specifically our emergency shelter, transitional housing, and permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing projects. This does not really, it reports very little on street outreach, and it doesn't report on specifically on how our coordinated entry system may be preventing people, for example, from entering into homelessness or entering into our system in the first place. But there's one slide that does have some information about street outreach and the work it's doing. And then I would also, by way of introduction, indicate that this is looking at the entire system as a whole. Earlier in the meeting, Jonathan, the chair of Performance Management Committee, mentioned that we also are beginning the process of looking at the performance on the COC approved standards and benchmarks for individual projects that are impact how our system performs as a whole. So this looks at kind of the big picture, and that work looks more at individual projects and how the individual shelters or rapid rehousing projects might be performing. So For HUD, we are measuring 6 specific measures that HUD has adopted probably a decade or more ago. And the first one is the length of time persons remain homeless. And we have 2 slides that, or two charts, I should say, that provide a picture here. The chart 1 on the left looks at the average and median length of time that people are in emergency shelters, and you see the median time has kind of remained flat, and actually over the period, the numbers above each dot on the line represents the number for each year. I would say too, kind of by way of introduction, this report is for the fiscal year that ended September 30th, 2022. So it looks at we go by the federal fiscal year that goes from October 1st through September 30th of the following year. So been a modest increase, although over the last 6 years, the average length of time homeless that people are in shelters has kind of been in the mid to low 90s, and it has kind of remained stable in that range. And then you've got the trend lines are the dotted smaller dotted lines underneath the solid lines. However, that number is not as concerning as the numbers on the chart number 2 on the right, which shows that the average and median length of time that people are experiencing homelessness prior to actually moving into housing over the last 7 years has increased significantly, both when you're looking at the average length of time and the median length of time. And this is based on when people come into a shelter, for example, we ask them, how long have you already been homeless? And so it's showing that people are reporting that the length of time that they're homeless before they come into a shelter or into one of our projects that is using the HMIS is significantly increasing, and then the time that it takes for us to move them into housing is also increasing significantly over the years. Second measure is the extent to which persons who exit homelessness permanent housing destinations return to homelessness. We've had a long-standing significant concern, I think, throughout the COC and in our projects as to that really we want to make sure that housing sticks when people leave a shelter, when they leave rapid rehousing projects, that they're able to maintain housing. And so this only showing really I think 2 charts here. One is the total percentage of returns to homelessness, and the 3 bands here on the chart are showing the blue is the percentage of returns to homelessness in less than 6 months. Red is percentage of returns additionally in from 7 to 12 months, and then the yellow at the top shows the percentage of returns from 13 to 24 months. Some things to note about this is that you can see that earlier in the 7-year periods, approximately half of our returns were in the first 6 months after people exited to a permanent housing destination. However, interestingly, in 2022, most of our returns to homelessness occurred significantly later. Less than half, 3%, were in the first 6 months, and then an additional 1% in the 7 to 12 months, and then 4%, or at least half, were in the second year after they had exited from one of our projects. I think that's a significant, again, kind of change from how the system was functioning several years ago. But the consistent declines in the percentage of returns to homelessness also suggests that overall system, we are doing well at providing the kind of assistance that people need to avoid returning to homelessness. In fact, we could say that it's always a question around efficiency and effectiveness, right? We're showing that we've been very effective at reducing returns to homelessness. Some question as to whether we could perhaps improve efficiency or the spending of public dollars by having our overall percentage of returns to homelessness be around the 10 to 15% range that we have been, but we certainly did a great job in 2022 preventing returns to homelessness. This chart number 2 shows the total number of returns. So it's rather than looking at the percentage of returns, it takes the same information, but just gives you the total numbers of returns to homelessness. And again, you can see that in 2022, as a system, according to the data in the HMIS, we only had a total of 36 households returning to homelessness from being in the homelessness housing system 2 years or more before the 2021 to 2022 federal fiscal year. So again, a significant drop off that perhaps when we come to a discussion time, if we have time, we can talk further about. The third measure talks about the number of homelessness persons. We use 2 primary numbers to look at the number of homeless persons. The first that people are most familiar with perhaps is the point in time count or the PIT count. Next month in April, we plan to release the count of the point in time count for January of 2023. This chart shows you the PIT counts for 2016 to January of 2022, showing the concern that we've had moving through the last several years of the pandemic is especially around the unsheltered count. While we've generally maintained emergency housing, emergency shelter inventory through use of non-congregate shelter to manage, to do the best we can to provide emergency shelter during the pandemic. Nevertheless, with those challenges, we've seen significant increases in unsheltered homelessness in between 2020 and 2022. The days of only having 32 unsheltered people, as we did in 2016, seem to be a distant memory. We can say also, and it's worth pointing out, that because we've had significant reductions in the use of transitional housing as a strategy to address the needs of people experiencing homelessness, our transitional housing count has declined significantly from 106 people to 29 people in 2022. Our only 2 transitional housing projects are funded by the the Federal Department of Veterans Affairs, using what are called grant and per diem funds, and they fund a project at Volunteers of America Maple Court and 20 beds of transitional housing at Trosa's Addiction Recovery Therapeutic Community. The annual sheltered count doesn't perhaps get the same amount of community awareness that the PIT count often does. These numbers are based on the entries of clients into the Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS, and you can see that since the pandemic started in the 2020 fiscal year, we've seen a slight rise, probably about a 10% rise overall in the annual sheltered count in our system. So something that we continue to monitor. Again, the numbers that are represented by the chart are below the chart, which hopefully are easily understood. The breakdown between emergency shelter, people coming through, and the transitional housing numbers. It is good to realize, I think, that even though our shelters experience a lot of challenges with helping people find housing to move into and out of shelter, the total number of people accessing emergency shelter across our system, even though it's increased between 2020 and 2022 by about 70 people, it's still below the 1,115 people that were accessing emergency shelter in 2016. Some of that could be attributed potentially to the work of our coordinated entry system, which is diverting people from homelessness. Measure 4 specifically looks at employment and income growth for homeless persons in COC funded projects. I'm not going to spend as much time on these two charts simply because it does not look at our entire system, but specifically looks at our rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing projects that are funded through the Continuum of Care annual homeless grants competition. The chart on the left looks at stayers in those projects. The chart on the right looks at the people who have left the system and gives you the total number of people who were leavers or stayers, depending on which chart you're looking at. And then the blue line is the total number, and the red line at the bottom shows the people who exited, in the case of leavers, who exited with increased total income from where they entered the project. And then for stayers, it looks at those who increased total income between when they entered the project and when they completed their annual assessment during that particular federal fiscal year. Measure 5 again relates to the numbers of persons who are experiencing homelessness, but it looks at the number who became homeless, quote unquote, for the first time. I put homelessness or for the first time in quotes because more precisely, HUD considers people entering homelessness for the first time if they haven't received shelter or housing assistance from the Continuum of Care projects or from the Continuum of Care within the prior 2 years. So HUD says, if you've been stably housed for 2 years without entering the homeless system, we would consider you stably housed, and if you do come back after a 2-year period, you're experiencing homelessness for the first time again. So the key takeaway here, I think, is that consistently, while we have in blue a significant number of people who have been cycling through our homeless system within the prior 2 years, the clear majority and a consistent majority, roughly a 2/3 to 3/4 of the people who are entering our emergency shelter, transitional housing, or permanent supportive housing, permanent housing projects did not have entries in the prior 2 years, and that's good. I think that's what we want to see. We'd like to see that number in blue continue to decline as much as we could get it. So measure 7 kind of is a companion with measure 5, and then it looks like that successful placement from street outreach projects, and then the successful placement in or retention of permanent housing by people in permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing projects. Really, this is the only chart that specifically looks at the performance of our street outreach projects. And we really only started using the HMIS to track street outreach work and activity in 2018. You can see that over the last 5 years, we've done better with getting information about street outreach work into the HMIS. And what I would say is from I think our point of view at community development, it's been great to learn that there are, dozens, if not scores of people being assisted by our street outreach projects who are exiting directly from the street outreach work into permanent housing. 70 people in 2021, 69 people, nearly the same number in the 2022 period exited directly to permanent housing. And even we had another substantial group that exited to temporary destinations. Unsuccessful exits would be people that left the project to unknown destinations. The street outreach projects just perhaps lost contact with them. As you know, people who are living on the streets in unsheltered situations are oftentimes moving around a lot, sometimes willingly, sometimes because somebody asks them to leave where they might be camping or hanging their hat. And so it can be a challenge for our street outreach projects to maintain contact. But even within that, I think we're having some significant success helping people living on the streets to move into permanent housing and to other temporary destinations. And then chart 2 looks at the percentage of exits to permanent housing destinations from all of our project types. Concern here is that we are the percentage of people when exiting from emergency shelters or other housing projects is trending downward. It had been trending upward prior to the 2020 year. Major drop off between 2019 and 2020 and can be attributed to the pandemic. The 2020 fiscal year would have ended September 30th of 2020, and that would have been right and in just as the pandemic was spreading across the country and impacting life in our society significantly. We haven't had significant improvements in that percentage of exits since then. We'll have to see if we can hopefully improve that percentage in coming years. This looks at the numbers of exits totally. The blue gives you the blue portion of the chart gives you the numbers and the kind of ratio of people who exited to other than a permanent housing destination. The red numbers or the red portion of the chart is the number who exited to a permanent housing destinations. The numbers in each portion of the chart in each year in white is the number for that portion of the chart, and then the numbers at the very top of the chart are the totals of the two numbers below. So it gives you a sense for the ratio. And let's see, chart 4 then looks at the exits and retention of housing of people in permanent supportive housing. And we're showing that, consistently very few people are leaving permanent supportive housing for anything other than a permanent housing destination. In 2022, only 5 people exited to other than exited to something else besides a permanent or positive housing destination. So briefly, we're doing okay on time. Madam Chair, we're doing okay on time.
Yes, we're good.
Okay, so 2 slides to end this presentation, some key takeaways, some positive trends across the system. We could say that the system continues to primarily serve households who've not been homeless recently or in the past 2 years. Street outreach, as we've seen in a recent slide, has been effectively placing dozens of unsheltered people directly into permanent housing or even into other temporary destinations as well, getting them off the streets. Permanent housing stability, as we just saw on the previous slide, is very high. The average and median length of time in shelter that we looked at in one of the first slides is remaining relatively stable. and returns to homelessness are at an all-time low. If you remember that slide where we had about, just what, 8%. Some concerning trends. Trends or system performance that's not heading in a positive direction, we might say, or that the length of time people are homeless prior to housing move-in continues to increase, and it's more than doubled in the last 6 years. We've seen the unsheltered point-in-time count continue to increase, particularly since the pandemic hit. Particular concern, we didn't talk about that a whole lot on that slide, but prior to the pandemic, we rarely in Durham saw unsheltered families living in cars or in a van or in another situation. For the last several years, in 2021 and 2022, I think we counted 13 unsheltered families one year and maybe 11 the other year. I think we'll find a similar number in the count that we reveal in April. The percentage of exits to permanent housing destinations is trending lower. That is a challenge, especially with the affordable housing challenges that we have, and just getting people back into housing is a major challenge, even as fewer people are coming through our system. Continues to be a challenge. And then the number of people entering the system annually has increased approximately 10% since the pandemic hit, as we noted on that slide. We will be working to post this slideshow or these slides to our COC website so that the community and people on the call today and in the meeting today can access it. But, certainly invite any comments from other members of the homelessness team within the department or community. So back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Lloyd. Very thorough, very good information. Ricky, you have a question?
I actually have 3, if that's okay.
Go for it.
First question, I don't remember what slide number it was, but Lloyd, it was on measure 3, chart 2.
Okay.
Talking about, yes, the annual sheltered count. Is this chart including white flag?
Yes. It would include white flag was using the HMIS. So,
Okay.
Right.
My next question was on measure 7,
Okay.
chart 2. Looking at just like the huge discrepancy between 2019 and 2020, just wanted to remind the COC lead agency that eviction moratoriums were taking place at this time, which definitely hindered the available affordable housing stock.
Sure.
So that definitely contributed to the decline there. And also a lot of smaller property owners, selling their units or properties to other interests that do not participate in third-party payments. So I
Right.
think, Durham has definitely seen a lot of that happening. And then just a general comment about the returns to homelessness being low, which is awesome. I did want to know if the COC lead agency looked into what is the length of permanent housing program participation, because I think that might go hand in hand. Like if we're not seeing a lot of recidivism, could it be because people are staying in housing programs longer, like particularly thinking about rapid rehousing that has a 24-month maximum participation? Like if rapid rehousing programs are holding on to households longer, then it does make sense that the system overall would see less returns to homelessness over a year or 2-year period.
Yeah, I think that's an important comment. The challenge is that the numbers in the 36 returns to homelessness in 2022, right, would have been looking at what happened to people who exited in the 2020 year to a permanent housing destination and then returned in the 2021 and 2022 period. Does that make sense? So really
Yes,
we're
I
going
I see
back.
what you're saying.
Yeah, so I think, it does suggest that at least, and maybe it might have been, at the beginning of the pandemic and prior to that, that those households, were stably housed and maybe as a result of the eviction moratorium as well that was in place, that the eviction moratorium may have also helped a lot of those households maintain housing during the 2021 and 2022 years. Does that make sense? But it's an important point to think about.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Lloyd? Tracy?
Yes, really good overview, Lloyd, of some of the trends that have been impacting the homeless population in Durham. But I also wonder whether or not staff has gone a little deeper to delve into any type of data that they've either captured through HMIS or other entities to kind of delve into what's causing some of the influx of different metrics regarding homelessness. Is it employment? Is it various systems, whether that's housing, finance, childcare, other things that could be contributing to this flow? Because as the triangle grows as a whole, we know that people are constantly moving to the area. Some are precariously housed when they move here, but then it becomes even more compounded when they realize the housing market doesn't always align with the job market and what they earn. And so some are cost burden, which puts them at a jeopardy for losing their housing. But I'm just wondering whether or not there's been any in-depth analysis over some of those things in which I mentioned.
So as I started with the introduction, this primarily looks at, information from our HMIS, secondarily from the point in time count, but and it looks at, so that basically is only looking at people when they come into the system. I believe many of you will remember Hanalea Hoberman being a part of the homelessness team until she left last June, I believe it was, and I think she had been doing some analysis of homeless diversion and some of the reasons that people were coming into the system, and what they were saying. And I think potentially we could try to see if we can get some information from our coordinated entry system around what the reason, what people might be saying as they're seeking assistance from our homeless housing system. But by and large, I mean, there's certainly information if you run an annual, what's called an annual performance report for the entire system in the HMIS, you can get information as to what percentage of the overall people in the system, don't have income or have health insurance and don't have health insurance and things like that. But it doesn't necessarily get precisely at, some of the more in-depth reasons that I think you're suggesting could be taken a look at. And I think also related to that, I'm mindful that our colleague Colleen Herbert is still planning to make a presentation. I think it's been postponed till April on the gaps analysis that a subcommittee of policy and planning has been working on for some time and trying to finalize. That might also offer more insights.
Yeah, I think it will. That was also my other thinking in regards to the coordinated intake entry process. Were there any, baseline information as to when people enter into that centralized portal that they're gathering data that, what is the cause of their homelessness or how did they become home? Things of that sort of kind of help inform some of the reasons people are becoming homeless, and also could inform different types of housing options along the housing continuum that could assist those populations, whether it's more emergency shelter, transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, or just affordable housing in general. So didn't know whether or not the coordinated intake process gathers any type of data related to that.
I do not know myself, and I don't know if any other team members on the call in the meeting would know about that either. Try to get some information about that from our system. Thanks for that suggestion.
We have time for one or two more questions. Does anyone have another question? Okay. But we're going to call on Lloyd one more time to talk to us about the home ARP update.
All right, thank you. Again, in this, I am subbing for our manager, Colin Davis. The home ARP concerns the American Relief and Rescue Plan. The city was notified after that plan was passed that the city, as an entitlement community, has received an allocation of $4,346,151 that can be used for eligible activities. We've had already some discussion with this body in December about how the city should use these funds. The allocation plan needs to be submitted to HUD by March 31st. So we are putting the final touches on the plan. If people in this meeting, whether HSAC members or other community members, wish to make additional comments to us about the plan, I believe the public comment period closes on March 25th. So let's see, that is, I think, a couple of days from now. Briefly, I'll share a couple things about the Durham's current draft of the plan and the department's and the city's intentions for the use of these funds. The 4 eligible activities that are included in the federal legislation and HUD's regulations are tenant-based rent assistance, the development and support of affordable housing, the provision of supportive services to people experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness, and the acquisition and development of non-congregate shelter units. There are 4 qualifying populations that these funds can be spent on. People who are literally homeless that meet HUD's definition of literal homelessness, or that meet the HUD's definition of being at risk of homelessness, people who are fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or human trafficking as defined by HUD, or another eligible population. And then other populations where providing supportive services or assistance would prevent the family's homelessness. So there is the opportunity for some homeless prevention assistance through the use of these funds. We've already consulted significantly through this body, through the meeting we had in December, as well as through a survey that was made available to the COC and the broader community earlier in this process. I counted up, there's a chart in the table, I should say, that has a list of 23 specific organizations that we solicited input from. Some of you are representatives of those organizations in this meeting. In summary, there's a paragraph where we're asked to summarize the feedback we received and the results of the consultation. And we currently are simply stating that the overwhelming feedback from the stakeholders was that we need more affordable housing for households exiting homelessness, particularly households with the highest barriers to obtaining and maintaining permanent housing. And the COC survey of the membership, the results of that showed that 2/3 of the respondents favored using these home ARP funds for affordable housing targeted for households under 30% of area median income, with a prioritization for households exiting homelessness. The overall was an estimate. A section asks us to describe the unmet housing and service needs of the qualifying populations, and some of this goes back to the some of the analysis that we've included in the plan. Goes back to the system performance measure data, which shows that approximately 900 to 1,000 people are entering the homeless housing system annually, right? You remember that presentation. Generally, a lot of the data shows that about 1/3 of the people coming into a system will leave without needing a whole lot of assistance beyond a short emergency shelter stay, right? A lot of the studies around people experiencing homelessness nationally in here in Durham would show that, you know, there's a percentage of people that just come to the shelter for a very brief period of time, and then they leave and they never interact with our system again. And, you know, we didn't provide a lot of support to them, except, you know, maybe a few nights in White Flag shelter or in the emergency shelter. If you take so that might leave about 600 people. If we would increase the amount of assistance we provide, or increase the number of people that are moving into permanent housing as they come through our system to about 25%, we could reach a point where we would assist more people. But even with that, the analysis would suggest that our current system, as it's currently functioning, even with some modest improvements, would not be able to meet the permanent housing needs of 300 to 400 people each year as they're coming through our system. So that's a concern. And based on that, the plan is to use all of this allocation, with the exception of 150,000 that would be used for administration and planning. So that would leave a total of $4,196,151. Plan is to use all of those funds to develop new affordable rental housing for as many as 25 new affordable rental housing units, or to potentially allow the renovation of up to 25 units of existing housing for households experiencing homelessness. So that is the proposal. On the administration and planning point, I'll point out that the statutory limit within the regulations is that up to 15% of the funds could be used for administration and planning. The current budget called for only using 3.45%, or 150,000 of the 4.3 million for administration and planning. That's, I think, a general overview that I was able to glean over the last day. We will have a request for proposals once HUD approves the plan, and we'll have that open for a minimum of 30 days, and then we'll hopefully have some interest in using these funds for the creation of more affordable housing specifically for people coming out of the homeless housing system. Madam
Thank you.
Chair, back to you.
Thank you, Lloyd. Does anyone have any questions for Lloyd?
Helen, I have a question. This is Heidi.
Yes, go ahead.
Lloyd, you may have mentioned this. When do these funds have to be spent? By when?
It's not reported in the plan. I believe we have until 2030. I think there is an understanding that it takes a while to get units of housing developed. So our most immediate timeline is to get the plan submitted to HUD by the March 31st deadline. But the actual expenditures, we do have several more years to actually get them spent.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lloyd.
Thank you.
Russ has in the chat that it's 2030, but it has to be encumbered before then. And he said he believes 2027 is the deadline for that.
That's consistent with my understanding.
Okay.
Thank you, Russ.
Any other questions? Humphrey?
Yes, I know, Lloyd, you mentioned a lot of that based on the data is coming to the affordable rental housing spectrum. Has it been identified as it relates to that planning for emergency housing? Is that, has that been looked at in a way to create emergency housing within that framework?
I think there was consideration about the emergency shelter needs. I'm not sure if you're using the term emergency housing to be synonymous with emergency shelter. If it is considered synonymous, I would say the emergency shelter providers and others are aware that the larger need and the more challenging need is affordable housing. There are some considerations for using other funds to create more non-congregate shelter in Durham. We explored those opportunities and felt that this, based on the timeline and everything else going on, that it would not be a good fit for the use of these funds. So that's why they're being directed towards permanent housing development.
Okay, thank you.
Renee?
I read through the plan that this was discussed at City Council, and I read through the information. My question was, you had estimated there would be about 25 units costing around $325,000 each. Are all of those units designated for those exiting homelessness? All 25, or would it be a percentage thereof?
They would be intended to be dedicated for people exiting from the homeless housing system, unless we could not find people who would be interested or meet that requirement. And then they could be used for other qualifying populations. Does that address your question?
Yes.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Okay, well, that was for information only. So thank you, Lloyd, for that presentation and for the follow-up questions. We are now at the point in our meeting where I will entertain any announcements. Does anyone have any announcements that you'd like to make? Anything your organization is doing for the benefit of the community? I don't have any either. So
I
we're
have
good.
an announcement.
Oh, go ahead.
The Durham County Women's Commission is holding a women's health walk on April 8th at 9 a.m. It will be at the Duke East Campus Wall. And everyone's welcome to join. We'll be out there from 9 to 11 a.m. April 8th.
Thank you, Ruby. Anna.
So.
Oh.
Madam Chair, I wanted to ask my colleague Ruby for a clarification. The East Campus Wall goes around East Campus?
Yes, we'll
like
be
about a
meeting
mile and a half?
on Broad Street across from Whole Foods.
Very good. Thanks for clarifying that.
Abena. Abena, did you have an announcement? Oh, you're typing it. Okay. Oh, Mike just stopped working. Great timing there. Community Safety Division has an open house on April 17th from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. That's down at City Hall, correct? Okay, wonderful. That'd be a great opportunity to get to meet everyone and see what you're all doing. And I'm looking forward to it. I got that on my calendar already. Great. Anyone else have any announcements? Shaisha?
I have a quick question. Are there any plans for, and this may have been discussed in a previous meeting I missed, for HSAC to return in person?
We had talked about that, and at this point, we decided to stay virtual for a little while longer.
Okay.
We'll readdress that later. But it just seems to be easier for everyone to be able to get to the meetings, and also the space at the time we were talking about, the space that we were using was used. Public health had been using. Of course, they're no longer using that now for their COVID vaccinations. They've moved back into their vaccination clinic now, but this is something that we will probably readdress in another few months.
Okay, thank you.
So our next HSAC meeting is Wednesday, April 26th. It's the fourth Wednesday. I want to remind everyone that we do still need more members on the policy and planning and performance management. We need HSAC members for policy planning and performance management, especially performance management. And we also need another COC liaison for policy and planning. So if you're interested in joining either of the subcommittees, email Durham Opening Doors at durhamnc.gov. There is a county appointed HSAC seat available that for the corporate private sector. So if you know someone who you believe to be a great addition to our team, then please let them know that this seat's available and that they can get in touch with, they can go to durhamcounty.gov, dconc.gov, county departments, and there's a link in the agenda. So those, if you have your agenda, you can make sure they have that link. But we'd be glad to have that seat filled as well. Colleen, I see your hand. Finally. All right.
No problem. We're hosting 2 different health fairs at NCCU. One is on Saturday, April 1st, and that's going to have a focus on men's health as well as Alzheimer's and dementia. And it is free and open to the public if there's interest. And then there's one that's being hosted on Saturday, April 15th. Both of these begin at 9 o'clock. It does require registration. There is the option for some persons to be able to still get breast cancer screening as well as some other screenings. Both events will host and have screenings available to the public.
Thank you, Colleen. Sorry, I missed your hand there. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our meeting. Thank you all very much for being here today. I will take a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn our meeting.
I see Ebony as the motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Angela Holmes. All in favor of adjourning, you are welcome to leave the meeting. Thank you all for being here today. We appreciate you.